Almighty God, we thank you for the guidance that you give this movement. We thank you for the blessing of having been called to be a part of it. We thank you for the light that you have shined on this path. Lord, we are looking back to better understand. We're doing review so that we can better understand, that we be equipped to go and take this message to your people. Lord, forgive us for our weakness and our dullness of mind. Forgive us anywhere we have not put this as priority. And we ask you to be with us, and that the rain that has come down to ripen the harvest, we could receive a blessing by reviewing it. We thank you and praise you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, I figured out how to rename it on a phone. Can I share real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Phil, or anybody who's on the phone, if you want to rename your phone, what you do is you go to that panel at the bottom where the mic is, the audio and this video, and click on participants. And then once that participants menu is open where you can see all the different participants, click on your particular phone, and then it brings up a menu where you can rename it. And that's it.
Okay. Did you get it? Oh. Who's
Yay.
yeah, who's
That's me.
that?
That
Huh?
was me, because I was playing. That's my phone.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, got it. Okay, before we do begin, I just want to put a reminder out there, and that everybody knows we're doing a lot of review, and we're going to review the structure of our alpha tonight. We need to better understand the increase of knowledge. We need to better understand from, going back all the way to May. In order to better understand the formalization, we need to understand the increase of knowledge. And we had stopped the work on the presentations from the camp meeting that we did here, that were at the end of August, and put those on hold, and they remain on hold. So I know that was suggested for somebody to, we got on the schedule for someone to present, and it may have caused hurt feelings to, for someone to be ready for a presentation when that's something that I'm pretty sure that, we discussed it a few different times, because it came up when, when Christine actually moved it, we didn't know what to do, where to put it at. And I just said, we'll just move it, several months ahead for now. And so we got to those couple of months ahead, and it was asked again, and I went and, we discussed again, and we weren't going to continue those presentations yet. So it did kind of cause a problem. So I just want to put a reminder out there that we're going to work on review of the increase of knowledge from May leading up to August. And we need to better understand the message. If the message of the third angel, the loud cry of the third angel, is the message that we take, then what we need to understand is the message of the third angel. And so anyways, I just wanted to put that out there. Those presentations are not being done yet. So let's go ahead and
Elaine,
yeah.
Are you talking about like the gay fight continues, those?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that the one? Yes, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll be holding those off. So tonight, we did have on the schedule to do, how I got there. we did have on the schedule to do, to continue the document, the politics of evasion. Did I say that right? Yeah, the politics of evasion. And I think I know myself, and I know I wasn't alone. Christine fell, and probably maybe others too. Those two that I know of. It was a little complicated to understand, and I think we need to better understand it before we try to gather together. And although that's usually times when it does, but we really struggled last week. And so I'm in the process of transcribing those notes, and it'll be 3 weeks out, I think. Christine, not this week, 2 weeks from this Sabbath. We'll be doing that one. So and talking about it. So that'll probably help us just a little bit more to try to get into that document some more. In the meantime, I encourage anybody that has the time to add it to their study to try to better understand it, so that when we do pull it back in, we'll be ready for it.
March 5th, right?
March 5th.
For what kind of marriage do you desire, right?
No, that's Elder Parmenter's presentation that I'm going to do. It's the one that's in February, like
Oh,
the
the 2014, the Sunday Law and Laodicea.
the
February 12th.
The one after that.
The politics. Oh, I'm sorry. The politics of evasion.
Yes.
Okay. February 19th.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Because Ninja Sheep is this week, and then I'm doing the Sunday Law and Laodicea, and then the next week is that one.
Okay.
Okay. So this one is a review again, going back to, you know what, I thought the date was, I had a different date on this one. So anyways, this is what we're going to work on for now, but I'm going to jump back some got another plan working on that we'll talk about later, not tonight. But I want to do some review of these presentations that she did. So this one is the structure of our alpha. And we went through this before. We're going to go through it again. I don't know why I wound up with a different date showing on it than what it shows there. So that's September 5th. I was trying to go back a little bit further. So, okay, so we're going to review some concepts that we are already familiar with. We need to remember not to be quick on making applications, but to be able to remember how we arrived at those applications. We need to be led through the steps of application, and that's really where the authority and power for that study comes in. Remembering that parable methodology. We cannot go over these truths enough, and almost every time the message grows, it seems to be 90% review and 10% pushing in further direction. We're also going to review some of the things that we have learned at the German International Camp meeting. Give me just a second. Didn't have my slide on. Okay, so we're also going to review some of the things that we have learned at the German International Camp meeting and what we studied about Millerite history. We can't make application of Millerite history if we're forgetting what's already been taught. It's absolutely crucial we remember what was taught there and how this has developed. When it comes to the external events of Millerite history, most of us in this movement have not understood well the external events of that 65 years from 1798 to 1863. We haven't understood it well at all. And because we haven't understood it well at all, we also need to catch up. We need to see the broad sweeps of external events that led us all the way into the Civil War time period, the successive steps that they took. But to get that broad overview, we need to study that history, understand that history well before we begin to make application. So as we discuss this history, please do not assume that there's application being made. When we speak about the external events that occurred, then it's to catch us up. When we speak about the external events that occurred, then it's to catch us up. There will be applications made. But first of all, we actually need to be familiar with the history. Mistakes occur in the movement when we quickly jump to application without correctly understanding the history. We're not going straight into application. We're going to just familiarize ourselves just a little with those external events. Give me just a second, move that off the screen. Obviously, there's application already made. We understand 1840, that the events of August 11th and all of that. So we did make one application last week, and we spoke about the advances in information technology and in the ability to communicate. We spoke about the end of ancient Israel, the Pax Romana. That was the Roman peace on land, but also on sea. How they cleared the sea of pirates. All of this sets up Acts 27, and Paul is able to not just take that fourth missionary journey, but the preceding ones before it on ship. Then one of the things that enabled him to do that was that Rome had cleared the sea of pirates. Did I say that right? He's on the ship, the Sea of Pirates. There's this nearly around 200-year time frame where the gospel can spread in relative safety. So this Roman peace that had not been heard of before in Earth's history, 200-year time frame on land and sea, the network of Roman roads that had been built. So when Paul is traveling by road, what enables him, it's this network of really quite advanced road building techniques. Feet deep into the earth, many of them surviving still today, 2,000 years later. So you have everything external to that time period set in place so the gospel can go forward and spread through as much of the known world as was then humanly possible when God is working through humanity. So you had the end of ancient Israel. You cannot go back to the Pharisees to learn at that time. You got the Pax Romana, Roman peace on land and sea, and that's the roads and communications that opened up the term Pax Romana, which literally means Roman peace, refers to the time period from 27 BC to 180 CE in the Roman Empire. This 200-year period saw unprecedented peace and economic prosperity throughout the empire, which spanned from England in the north to Morocco in the south and Iraq in the east. So this opened up the way. God was preparing the way for when Jesus would come, for then the gospel to go, that they would be able to this would be the way and the means, the mechanism of communicating the gospel. We spoke about the Protestant Reformation. What gave the Protestant Reformation the ability to spread? Its power was in that 50-year time period previous to the Protestant Reformation. The invention and perfecting to a reasonable degree of the printing press. The ability to print quickly, print and distribute material. So Martin Luther wants to nail his thesis on the door, on that door, he can then have it printed and spread like the leaves of autumn. And this gives power to the Protestant Reformation, and it was technology just on time. So again, at this period of time, when the message comes, they cannot go back to the papacy to learn. And the message goes forward with the Protestant Reformation using the printing press. Another form of communication. Beginning of modern Israel. This is where we began to make application to the beginning and the end of our own peoples. Beginning of modern Israel, what year were the train systems developed? The first passenger train, month and year. The first passenger train begins operation December 25th, 1830, just in time, a few days before 1831. In 1831, what is William Miller going to do? He's going to begin to travel and teach his message of the Second Advent. So 1831 is, he's getting his credentials, and isn't it 1833, I believe, when he starts to preach? Is that correct?
That's the way I remember it.
I know the falling of
Go ahead, Susan.
the falling of the falling of the stars was 1833, and that coincided with his message. That I remember, because it was like God, letting the then known world see that blessing, right? That, because I can't explain it. So 1831, I don't know why that date. Anyway, continue.
So 1831 is when the first passenger train, or 1830, December 25th, 1830. And that's preparing the way now for the gospel again to go. So you've got the Pax Romana, where the roads are built during a 200-year time of peace, unprecedented time of peace. Also, the seas are cleared of the pirates so that they can travel by sea and by roads. And then you have the Protestant Reformation, and you have the printing press that comes in just in time for the work of Martin Luther and the Reformation. So then the beginning of modern Israel, getting into the Millerite history, you have the trains, the steamboats, and used for communication. So December 25th was 1830, the first steam-powered passenger service. There was track laid open for operation. William Miller, there was 1830 to 1840, there's 1,800 miles of track laid. And the first call from 1840 to 1850, there's 9,000 miles of track laid. And then the message when it's to go to the world, 1850 to 1860, there's more than 30,000 miles of track.
I have down that it was 1833 when he got his credentials. He traveled and he was teaching.
Okay.
On 1833.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. That's
Yeah, I thought that was the right date.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh?
I know 1831's in there. There was a 2-year period, but I didn't remember the specifics. So this said when she did this, she did say 1831. I mean, I can go back and check the video, but I'm pretty sure she said 1831. And
No, I'm sure you're right. I just don't remember that date being a date for on the line. You know, it was like, anyway.
On the line is definitely 1833. But I do remember 1831 to 1833, there being a 2-year period that went on there. And I think, and I don't know, maybe I have it confused with 1818 because there was 2 years there, 1816 to 1818 as well, right? When he gets the message. Yeah. So anyways, it says 1831 here. Maybe I'll go back and verify the video as well, but I know that 1833 is what's on the line. Okay, so you have trains, but you don't just have trains, you also have the steamboats. We don't think much about the steamboats, but they were a serious means of travel and communication back then. The most famous state-led creation of the market revolution was undoubtedly New York's Erie Canal, which began in 1817. It was a 364-mile man-made waterway that flowed between Albany on the Hudson River and Buffalo on Lake Erie. The canal connected the eastern seaboard and the Old Northwest. 364-mile man-made waterway. It set off a canal frenzy, but along with the development of the steamboat, created a new and complete national water transportation network by 1840. So when the Millerites were conducting their camp meetings, they're coming by passenger trains and steamboats. And only a generation earlier, that would have been unheard of. So the transition from an agricultural to an industrial economy took more than a century in the United States, but that long development entered its first phase from the 1790s through the 1830s. When you look at that reform line, 1798, 1790s to when the message must begin to spread, 1831, the 1830s. From the 1790s to the 1830s, you have the first phase of the Industrial Revolution, and it revolutionizes how information can be spread. So when they say of August 1844, when the midnight cry arrives and it spreads across the United States with such power and such speed in August, September, October, in just a couple of months, what gave it that power, that speed beyond the message itself, was the ability to travel by steamboat or by rail car. And also by then, although not in regular usage till a little later in 1844, you have the telegraph, Morse code, what has God wrought. And it's going to broadcast two important things. One, what God has wrought. Two, the other focus on everyone's mind, except for a Millerite, is the 1844 presidential election. So when we talk about this century-long industrial revolution, we had a couple of interesting thoughts from people, and it seemed that most of the research being done further on that was coming out of Wales, actually. So a brother currently residing in Wales messaged Elder Tess about the work of the Industrial Revolution in the 1888 history. And that's an interesting thought. A sister in Wales also speaking about our going back much further into history and the time in Egypt, the beginning of ancient Israel. Elder Tess suggests this is something that we're seeing a pattern of how God works externally to also be able to spread his gospel messages at those key points in history. We haven't covered the beginning of ancient Israel, and we haven't covered 1888, but we've covered the end of ancient Israel, the beginning of modern Israel, and the end of modern Israel and the Protestant Reformation. The end of modern Israel, 1989, the big bang of the information age, that year, the time of the end, the development of the World Wide Web. So the end of modern Israel, that's our time, 1989, you've got the World Wide Web. And now there is no life outside this movement. Not
Elaine?
Yeah.
Christine posted in the chat that the 1831 date is the formalization of the message.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, 1831 to 33, the formalization of the message. Yeah.
And the fact of the stars was the empowerment of the message, right? The glorious manifestation of God. That was what I was trying to remember. That empowered the message, the 1833 date that you and me were remembering, but the 1831 is the formalization of the message.
Say that again, sorry. 1841, did you say? 31?
No, 31.
Okay.
The date that a few slides back.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember.
Yeah. I knew 1831 was there, but I know that 1833 is what shows on the line. So that Christine, you said posted, I was trying to read through that real quick.
So in 1831, he did start speaking then, publicly speaking, but it was in 1833 when he received his credentials to speak to the churches.
Okay, got it. Okay, so that was where we did this review. Is always good because things that we learned, I know I forget. That was where we did make application, just simply a simple thought that one of the evidence is that we're in a reform line, that God is having a specific movement with a specific message that is to spread and give light to the world. One of the evidences for that is that there is this big bang in the way that information can be communicated. The evidence is no more evident than what we're doing right now when we are covering multiple continents at one point in time, unheard of in 1830. So what the World Wide Web has done to spread the gospel. And I don't remember if it's in this particular presentation, but I know that at some point in time, maybe somebody remembers where she said it, that it was the only purpose of it. It's used for other things, but it was the only purpose was to prepare to spread the gospel. So this is just looking at all of them broken down. We went through the Pax Romano here, the end of ancient Israel. And at this point in time, they could not go back to ancient Israel. They could not go back to the Pharisees and learn. You've got the Protestant Reformation. They have to go forward. They cannot go back to the papacy and learn. The beginning of modern Israel, you can't go back to the Protestants and learn. And the end of modern Israel, you can't go back to the SDA pastors to learn. And that there's no life outside of this movement. So the lines that we have drawn are the Omega histories of ancient and modern Israel. And we're yet to fill them in. The Omega of ancient, what we're placing with that is the Omega of modern. So you have the Omega ancient and Omega modern. We've begun by laying out the Omega of modern, 1989, 9/11, Sunday law, close of probation, second advent, and 5 key waymarks. It's the hand of God. It's his method of drawing out a people. So we have, oh, that's interesting. There's things that don't click in the Bible when it's talking about the hand of God guiding us. Just kind of clicked in there. I mean, I got it, but I never clicked and totally connected it. So it's the hand of God. It's his method of drawing out a people. So we have this line of the 144,000. Then we have priests, Levites, and the Nethinims. So you have priests, Levites, and Nethinims. We've gone through all of that in the previous studies. If that's entirely new to people, if you're new here, then I would encourage you to go back and watch this series from its first presentation titled The Apis Bull. And that's what I want to go back to as well. We want to go back to May of 2020 in the Apis Bull. It's the first in a series that we've done here in Australia. It will cover these histories. It will cover these histories of ancient and modern Israel. I think that's where I came up with the date, because I'm going to verify something real quick. I'm on my phone, so give me just a second.
While you're doing that,
Yeah.
I was watching a presentation by Emma Bryant, and on the 144,000 line, they're not using 9/11 anymore. I know this is a review, but now they're just putting the 2001 date.
Yeah. I think they've been doing that off and on for a while. Yeah, I need to look at, because this says September but when I went to go pull it from the website, it's under the Midnight Watch and it says May 9. So that's not correct. May 9 date. Okay, because we want to go back and understand, we want to go back and review as well the Apis Bull, and to better understand sexism and the dominance and power, to help us to better understand the hierarchy structure and dominance and power, to help us to continue to go back to the formalization. So, okay, so we've gone through all that in previous studies. Okay, let's see, I encourage you to go back. We want to go to title the Apis Bull. It's the first in a series that we've done here in Australia. It will cover these histories of ancient and modern Israel. We have 4 groups: priests, Levites, and Nethinims, and 144,000. So you've got the priests, the Levites, the Nethinims, and this is the line of 144,000. We have 1989 for the priests, 9/11 or 2001, 2014, 2019, and 2021. This one here marks Jacob's time of trouble for the first group called, and the first of 4 successive periods of that time of trouble. The first of 4 successive harvests. So you have, this is the first time of trouble or harvest, and that's the second, the third, and here's the 4th. So the priests actually go through each successive history of the time of trouble and harvest. They go through their harvest, the Levites harvest, the Nethinims harvest, and then the harvest here, the last harvest. We have the Sunday Law waymark on the line of the 144,000, and bring that down to the Levites or the Nethinims. So it comes all the way down here, the Sunday Law. The end of ancient Israel, you have 4 BC, 27 AD, is the baptism of Christ and the arrival of the second angel. So this is the baptism and the arrival of the second angel, not to be confused when you talk about another study where she lines that up after here. So but looking at these main lines, so the second angel arrives at 9/11, and then 2014, so the second angel arrives here. And 2014 begins his work between 2014 and 2019. So we know just from review that 2012 is when the message of time came in. We saw the change of leadership here. And so 2014 marking the work of Elder Parminder, the second angel. And 2019 is the cross right here. And then 2021 is Pentecost. So you have the preparation, the 4 steps: plowing, early rain, latter rain, and harvest for the first group called. And this first group is the disciples. The disciples are plowed under the administration of John the Baptist. So this would be the plowing, and they were plowed, and the disciples were plowed under the administration of John the Baptist. I took that in there. We want to go back up here. Hang on one second. Yeah, because she does have those dates. Okay, so this was the baptism of Christ right here. The first temple cleansing goes to work, and there's the cross, and there's Pentecost. At the baptism, you have the second angel. Christ arrives. He goes through this time period in the wilderness, and he doesn't yet begin his work. At the first temple cleansing, that's here. So he goes into the wilderness, but he doesn't begin his work. At the first temple cleansing, he announces the beginning of his work. John the Baptist begins to cease teaching, and he's in prison. From that first temple cleansing through to the second temple cleansing, which is 2019, which is in the time period just prior to the cross, through Gethsemane in the upper room. The cross marks the close of probation and the beginning of the time of trouble for the first group called. That was the disciples, and they are scattered. This is their time of trouble from the cross to Pentecost. At Pentecost, they come out of that time of trouble. They're united and they have a message. And what are they going to do? They're going to go to a second group. They go back to the church, to the Jews that they reach at Pentecost. So you have the cross in Gethsemane. They're in this time of trouble. They go through the upper room experience. They come out united, and then they're ready for work, and they're going to go back to the church. So they go back to the Jewish nation. You have a second gathering in, 2 calls to the church. So you have 2 calls. The first call, and here's the second call for the second group. 2 calls to God's people. First, the disciples under John the Baptist and Christ, and then they're going to go back to that same nation at Pentecost. So the first call here, and then the second call. From Pentecost to 34 AD is which time prophecy? The stoning of Stephen, 70 years, 70 weeks, 490 days. This is the 90-year time period at the end of which the Jewish nation is cut off. So 34 AD lines up with Sunday law. So you've got 34 AD here. It's the stoning of Stephen, and it lines up with the Sunday law. And what do they do in 34 AD? First the church, then the world. 34 AD, they go from the church, from taking a message to the church. Now probation has closed for that institution, and now they're going to take it to the world, to the Gentiles. So now they're going to take the message and go to the world. So from 34 AD to 70 AD. Next, you have the second advent, and that's 100 AD. The island of Patmos and John the Revelator. So you have 2 groups that belong to the church, 2 calls to the church, and 1 to the world. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the first portion of Acts, is all to tell us of what occurs before God's people go to the world, before 34 AD, before the Sunday law. That becomes so important for us to understand, because what is Adventism looking for? It's just looking for the Sunday law. That is as if a Pharisee is walking through history, walking through that 490 years, just waiting for 34 AD. And what does he miss? What does he fail? Anybody?
What was the question again?
What does he fail? Says that's as if a Pharisee is walking through history, walking through that 490 years, just waiting for 34 AD to come. And what does he miss? What does he fail? What did the Pharisees miss? What did they fail?
Well, their test, the way Jesus is supposed to be, that he's got looking at the wrong character.
Got what?
The wrong character, looking for a Apis bull or king to fight.
So by the time he gets to 34 AD, it's too late. John has come and done his work and died. Christ has come and done his work. That message is already there. It's already rejected. It's already failed. If they're waiting to 34 AD, that's as if they're not going to study for it. That's as if they're not going to study for a test. You're not going to study for a test. You're just going to wait for it to arrive. So all that had happened was to prepare them for this. And they didn't get their training where they needed it. Let's see. Christ has come and done his work. John the Baptist came and did his work. Christ came and did his work, and they missed it. And so here they are just waiting for the end of the 490 years and not knowing what's going to happen. So you're not going to study for a test. You're just going to wait for the test for that time to arrive. Sign up for a university, travel, enjoy yourself, do nothing, and then sit down and take that bar exam and see how you do. That was the behavior of the Jewish nation. They failed to see the steps that led to 34 AD. Just like that.
Would it be the external events then too? Because it seems like the external events, would inspire them to realize something, why? Wouldn't it, just like for us, I know no one called me from the church. I never got a CD from anybody to watch Jeff, but something just moved me that I knew there had to be truth because it was missing in the church. So I went searching, and it seems like maybe that's what they also should be doing, right? Like the answers aren't there. And so it seems like you'd be inspired to look for the answer somehow. It's the same way a lot of us did. We went searching, knowing there had to be truth out there.
Yeah, and that work, for us, that work was done by the first angel, and then the second angel arrived. Same as what we see here, that John the Baptist did a work. They rejected that. Christ came, they rejected that. So they're not ready for their test. So you have Elder Jeff that did a work. You have Elder Parmenter doing a work, who have done a work. And Adventism rejected that. So they're just waiting for the Sunday law to come, and they have no understanding what it is, no understanding on time. And, they have no understanding of these reform lines to show them the structure. And it sets them up or prepares them to fail the test. And if they failed in those steps, where did they end up in 34 AD? It was failure. That's the exact mentality of Adventism today. They go into those gospels and make neat, lovely moral applications and don't realize that they're looking at a prophetic history that was designed to prepare God's people prior to them giving a message to the world, prior to Sunday law. What did the Jews have wrong? What did they not understand? And what they didn't understand was the nature of the kingdom. And what else? The nature of Christ, or to rephrase that as his character, what he looks like, present truth, time. They didn't know the time of their visitation. So the plowing begins, and then you get the former rain, and then you get the latter rain. So what is it that prepares us for this work?
Can you ask that again, Elaine?
Yeah, what prepares us for this work? What prepared us? What is preparing us, because we're not ready and we were supposed to be? What is preparing us?
The message.
The message. And I said it a minute ago, what is that message?
Equality.
Well, yeah, that too. That's not what I was talking about, but yeah. How does the message come? I guess it's a better way to say it.
Through our prophet.
What'd you say?
Through our prophet.
I didn't quite understand that.
What do you mean?
She said through Elder Tess, the prophet.
Oh, okay, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know why it wasn't clear. It was probably me. I got bad hearing. So we have the plowing, we have the former rain, we have the latter rain, and then you have harvest. So how did that message come? Yes, through the prophet.
Do you mean line upon line? Huh?
Yes, but just, I'm talking real basic. You have the plowing, you have the former rain, you have the latter rain, and then you have harvest. What's bringing that message?
The rain?
The rain, right? So what do Adventists do?
They miss the rain? Is that what you mean?
Well,
They've been praying for rain for, I remember, yeah.
they're praying for the latter rain.
They missed the message.
Yes.
That's the message. They miss that the latter rain is a message.
Well, they can't get the message. Because you have to have a prophet to give you the message.
Well, prayerfully, we see some Levites get the message. Because we know that at 2021, who's leading the Nethinims? Who's leading? Who's leading the,
Do you mean
the Levites? The Levites. I said Nethinims. Who's leading the Levites at 2021?
us, right?
Right.
Is that what you're talking about?
Right. Like here, you had a change in leadership, but we didn't know it. Right. So
Yes, look how long it took to find that out too.
so that, and the final events are rapid ones, so things get shorter. The Adventist church is under new leadership, and those that accept this new leadership come in, there'll be Levites. They will accept the new leadership. They will accept the prophet. If that made sense. And we also are leading the Nethinims. And I might have had it wrong. I wonder if we're leading them here, I believe. Maybe somebody remembers that, to be specific. I don't want to say it wrong. I know that there's changed leadership here for the priests. Because I want to remember, I'm thinking I'm remembering it's at Pentecost that the Nethinims become under the leadership of this movement. And the church already was and didn't know it. Maybe somebody remembers that. So they did know some of their time of visitation. There's some that are studying the prophecies. They know it is soon, and all Adventism says the Sunday law is soon. But do they know when? They don't understand the prophecies. So they have a rough idea of time, but they don't have things clear. They don't have the dates. It isn't clear in their mind. They just know they're close. Just like Adventism today, they know that they are close. But this conversation is going back and forth between Israel as well. They knew the dates, or the 490, that it was close. They knew it was close. So, but it isn't clear in their mind. They just know that they're close. Just like Adventism today, they know that they are close, but because of their misunderstandings, they're letting go of the prophetic message. They don't have a structure to work with. And the structure is properly laid out. The lines properly laid out with the events in their proper place are the power that leads this, or the 5 waymarks, the hand of God. The nature of the kingdom and the nature of the king, if you don't understand the kingdom, you don't understand the king who runs the kingdom. So they don't understand the nature or character of God's kingdom, but then they also don't understand the character of God. Excuse me. And when you don't know what God looks like and you want to construct one, if you don't know what a God looks like and you want to construct one, what do? You build one in your own image, and that is idolatry. They built one in their own image, and when their God was before them, they could not recognize him, and that is Adventism today. So what's this God that they build in their own image? That's idolatry, huh?
Apis bull.
Apis bull. And what's the Apis bull represent?
The golden calf, is that what you mean?
No, not quite. Think back on the study of the Apis bull. What does the Apis bull represent? I think Christine might have said something towards that a minute ago. Anybody? I think I said it at the beginning of the study.
Susan said idolatry.
Idolatry, yeah, we got that. Idolatry, it says in here. Where did it say it? Yeah. You build a God in your own image, and that is idolatry. So we've narrowed that down to the Apis bull. And what does the Apis bull represent?
Is it
Paganism?
I heard somebody else too.
Go ahead, Susan.
No, I think she heard what I said. I didn't hear what you said, Ava.
Right.
Oh, I was going to say the patriarchal system, like
Right.
the fault. I mean, I don't know how you say it.
Right. The hierarchy, the patriarchal system, sexism, power and dominance, male superiority.
But it still goes back to paganism, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, all of it's correct. It's just I wanted to narrow it down. So they cannot recognize God because they have built a picture of God built in their own image. And if you can think about that, we had that ourselves until the study of the Apis bull opened up an understanding gender equality and feminism. God had to come through messages and messengers that were designed to teach people his character. And people fight against that when it goes against their own set worldview. What did the Jews not understand? They did not understand the character of the king. They did not understand the nature of the kingdom. And the key, they did not understand the external events. This isn't just about their internal experience. This is all about what was supposed to happen to Rome. They don't understand the external events. That becomes also a crucial failure. So when we see the events today, it's not just the internal understanding of the kingdom of God that causes failure. It's not understanding correctly the external events. In their history.
You know, I was reading today. I'm sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
I was reading today that the coronavirus probably going to go in the Atlantic, an article that it's probably going to go into a lull like it did before, and then it's going to come back again because they just can't get a handle on it because of the way that it continues to mutate. And we know that that's part of the time of trouble, right? Not only the weather and disasters, right? But this pestilence or this disease. And it seems like you add all these things that are going on, that these external events would drive people to look deeper. I hope, anyway.
Well, for some it does, but it is part of the sword. It is the sword that comes and divides, whether it be internal or external. It's like a sword and it divides. So you had the two streams of information and the conspiracy theories that cut people out and hardened their heart one way, right? And
Yes.
those on the others drinking from the other stream, it's from that stream that the Nethinims will be found. But then we had to have the warning of false freedom because people were leaving conservatism and thinking that now we're all to be liberal without reforms, without the reforms vows. Okay, so let's see. In their history, the glorious land is Israel. They don't understand Rome, but you could also argue they don't understand the glorious land. And what is going to happen to the glorious land? Each waymark in this sequence is a point where they should have recognized external and internal events, and they failed. When you think of Adventism, Adventism stands prior to the Sunday law. Prior to the Sunday law. They've been through 1989, this is Adventism as a whole, has been through 1989, has been through 9/11, has been through 2014, has been through 2019. They've been through over 30 years, and just like the Jews of old, they're looking to the Sunday law here with no prophetic framework and a complete misunderstanding about the character of God in external events. So, I mean, just hearing that when I was asking the question about trying to get to the latter rain being a message, it's not, they're praying for the Holy Spirit and they're praying for rain when the rain's been falling on them all along. And it goes back to that quote that Ellen White says, the rain would be falling on hearts all around them and they wouldn't know it because they didn't know what the rain was. I think most of us, if not all of us, came out of Adventism believing that, or, in Adventism, believing that there's some kind of magical dust that's going to land on us and there, poof, we'll get it and we'll be where we need to be. But it's been a message all along, and it's been an internal work and an external work. So like with the ancient Israel, they needed to understand Rome and the glorious land and the external and the internal events. And because of that, they stood looking for their end without having any idea what it looked like either. So this is why we say over and over again, a correct understanding of external news sources, what you can believe and what you can't believe, what is truth, what is conspiracy theories, is life and death. So we've done this before. We all believe in one world government. That is what is coming. But then there's two different things to fear. You can fear globalism, the UN, or you can fear nationalism. You got two sides, both all agree it's going to be a one world government, but it's either going to be globalism or nationalism. Externally, people all across the world are split by whether they see globalism as the threat or nationalism as the threat. Whether they're in the United States or Germany or Russia or Spain or Brazil or India, they are split between which threat they see as being the one to fear. Globalism, they see as the wicked UN. Those as conservative Adventists, I know that's where I was. the wicked UN. It's the satanic deep state. That's the theory of QAnon. Secret societies, the Rothschilds, the Illuminati, George Soros, Bill Gates, growing immorality, signs, the 666, song lyrics. If you believe this is the worldview, that you're not to fear, you stand in line with QAnon. And who is their hero? The only one that can save them. QAnon's hero is Trump. So Trump's going to save them from this wicked UN and deep state. You can do all of this not through Adventism, certainly not through Walter Weiss. All he's done is poach conspiracy theories from Protestantism. He has no peculiar Adventist message. It's poached Protestantism. And we saw in the last couple of studies that we went through and reviewed how similar or pretty much the same Walter Weiss' message is to looking back at that history and what came to the Holocaust. If you fear nationalism, you see the Seventh Kingdom as a US dictatorship. You look at that, you look at ancient Israel and you see the tribes, one as a dictator controlling the others through manipulation and force. When you're a country like Mexico, for example, you're watching your population get more unhealthy. There's a growing obesity crisis. People are eating a lot of junk food, and Mexico decides they want to bring in food labeling laws to help people make better choices about what is healthy and what is unhealthy. So they want to bring in more clear packaging. So junk food can't be sold without people being aware of the dangers to their health. Just as you would put it on a cigarette packaging, Mexico wants to do that. And what does the United States do? The United States likes to export junk food. So they control Mexico through their trade agreements. If Mexico wants trade agreement with the United States, they're not allowed to put on their own packaging health safety labels. So a controlling faction there. Kenya wants to ban plastic, ban the use of plastic bags. Where does the United States want to dump all of its plastic trash? In Kenya. Who has the upper hand in these trade agreements? There are countries trying to do the right thing for their own people when it comes to plastic, when it comes to food labeling, and they can't get that done because of these American trade agreements, NAFTA. They force junk food on South American countries because they have that export market and they can control that. That's just one small sub issue where the United States already acts as a global bully, where it already controls and manipulates. Mexico can't go to the UN and have the upper hand. It's controlled through America. We see this as a union between the Republican Party and corrupt, socially conservative Protestantism. We understand this based on parables. World War I plus World War II equals World War III. And some in the world, a Gentile, not in the sophisticated way this movement can do that, but they can see that. And if you see nationalism is the global threat, Trump is a dictator. So when you have 34,000 people marching in Germany, marching in Berlin saying, we believe in QAnon. And by the way, we are aware of the Rothschilds and the Illuminati threat, George Soros and Bill Gates and that wicked World Health Organization. Somebody gonna say something? Okay, I just muted you. If you wanted to say something, go ahead and let me know. There was some background noise. Or Christine, if you could watch for me, if you would. Okay, I made you a co-host if you could help me watch that. Okay, so, and someone in the world, the Gentile, not in the sophisticated way this movement can do that, but they can see that. And if you see nationalism is the global threat, Trump is the dictator. So when you have 34,000 people marching in Germany, marching in Berlin, saying we believe in QAnon, and by the way, we're aware of the Rothschilds and the Illuminati threat and George Soros and Bill Gates and that wicked World Health Organization that's trying to vaccinate us all, control us through this pandemic, through secret societies, through this satanic deep state. This is Walter Weiss's message. Where does Adventism stand? Whether you're a conference attending member, whether you're part of an independent ministry, where does Adventism stand when they're standing before the Sunday law? Whether you're a Pharisee or whether you're a Sadducee, the greatest threat is that they all stand under globalism because they don't understand the character of God, and they don't understand the nature of his kingdom, and they don't understand the external events. So priest, Levite, Nethinim, 144,000, all are being torn by this one issue between globalism and nationalism. So you can see, as we see the line of the 144,000, we know that this line, line is done. We're on this line now. We've always been on this line, but this is the line that we focus on. This is no more. We're past this. But all of this history, we know that this was plowing, former rain, latter rain, and harvest, plowing, former rain, latter rain, harvest. It's these external events of the issue between globalism and nationalism that is dividing. And there's a lot of issues that go on within each, if that made sense. So why do you have two sets of protesters in the United States fighting? Across the world, there's now a division between two groups of people. It can be summarized as simply as saying globalism or nationalism. Globalism taught through conspiracy theories, or the threat of nationalism taught through parable teaching. So one is taught through conspiracy theories, and one is taught through parable teaching. Once you see that divide, it starts to impact every area of your life. Once this message grew and spread, all of a sudden we had to reinvestigate our individual position on vaccination. Because what does the globalism side say? Those 34,000 people marching through Berlin, holding up QAnon signs, fighting against the satanic deep state, fighting vaccinations, it's part of one mindset and one methodology. And it's conspiracy theories. The world is divided. Adventism is divided. But as an institution, whether it's the General Conference or even worse, if it's an independent ministry, they stand by and large on the globalism side of the issue, on the wrong side of the issue. That's why ancient Israel was overthrown, shipwrecked in 34 AD. That's why we can see what Adventism is heading towards, the rocks that will destroy it at the Sunday law. But God has a movement that understands the external events and that understands increasingly from 1989 the character of God. So those that stand on the side of nationalism and see Trump as a dictator are how did she say it? Globalism taught through conspiracy theories, or the threat of nationalism taught through parable teaching. So this is what they're actually seeing as well, depending on what side they're on. The stream that was the conspiracy theories that led them to believe that globalism and the satanic deep state, QAnon, secret societies, and all of that. And there are now anti-vaxxers and all that entails. And or this, if you see this nationalism side, if you they begin to connect the dots and connect to Hitler and fascists. So they're seeing this, and it's dividing people. Has divided people. So we're talking here about the Omega histories. We want to step back some. As we've discussed before, we have these three histories. And this was ancient Israel, and it'll come back to the history of Babylon. You have ancient Israel, the red up here. and it'll come back to the history of Babylon. And this is the omega of ancient, and they're in captivity to Rome. Right here, the omega of ancient in captivity to Rome. So you go beyond 4 BC, you go back to Babylon and back to Egypt. But in this history of, in the ancient history of Israel, this is Rome in captivity. This middle history, they come out of Babylon and they were meant to complete that work, build the temple and reform this history here. Going back to the beginning of ancient Israel, they're calling out of Egypt. We need to go back to the studies of the Apis bull to see how these 3 histories are linked: Egypt, Babylon, and Rome. And how those 3 histories are linked. So keep that one in your minds, that we need to go back to the studies of the Apis bull to see how Egypt, Babylon, and Rome are linked. Then we want to take modern Israel backwards as well. This is the end of modern Israel. This is the end of modern Israel, and this is the middle history when the work was to be completed. Where are we at here? Down here. When the work was to be completed, and that was the 1888 history. Then we come back, and we're discussing now is our alpha, the alpha of modern Israel. We want to see this structure for our alpha. So taking this history and going back to the 1888 history and then back to the alpha, which would be the Millerite history. So this is our alpha history, and we're constructing the line of the 144,000. You see this, the alpha history and constructing the line of the 144,000. We've constructed that last week, and it was done in Germany last year. You have 1798, 1840, 1850, 1861, and 1863. Just to remind us, we come back to the omega history of ancient and modern, and you have 2 calls. This history here, you have 2 calls to the church and 1 call to the world. So 2 calls to the church and 1 call to the world. The 144,000 being part of this number. Coming back to the alpha history of modern, I think that's the duplicate. No, it's not. Okay. Coming back to the alpha history of modern Israel. So we have 1798, 1840, 1850, 1861, 1863. How many of these have the external events attached to them? Going back to 1798, all of them have external events attached to them. We discussed this a little bit last week, particularly 1850, but you have 1798, you have the events in Rome, taking the Pope captive. You have Napoleon go to Egypt, the beginning of his Egyptian campaign. So there's a lot of events in 1798. 1840, we'll discuss more of 1840 as we go along. 1850, we talked about the 1850 Compromise and the Fugitive Slave Act. In 1861, what happens in 1861? That's the beginning of the Civil War. And we understand that if they had been a history of success, if they hadn't gone into the Laodicean condition in 1850 here, that Christ was to return in their own dispensation. He would have returned here in their own lifetime. Ellen White makes that explicitly clear. But we also understand that October 22nd, 1844 was a shut door. So where's October 22nd on this reform line? Up here. It's not there. You just have the 5. It's not there. So we have to recognize that there is a reform line underneath. So looking at the alpha of modern Israel, you've got the 5 waymarks: 1798, 1840, 1850, 1861, 1863, and October 22nd, 1844 is not on that line. So we have to recognize that there is a reform line underneath, a fractal, the shadow. with building the history in between, this is October 22nd, 1844, and we know here that there was a shut door. If there's a shut door, then this is a close of probation. It's the beginning of the time of trouble. So we can see already that this top reform line up here is like the line of the 144,000, but there's still going to be these progressive steps. You have the time of trouble here. That was the Civil War, but you also have this first group, the Millerites. They experienced their great test, their shut door, their close of probation, the beginning of their time of trouble on October 22nd, 1844. So the Millerites experience a shut door, a close of probation, and their time of trouble. This begins a time period of harvest. So we have harvest. Back here, looking at this one, we have a harvest, a harvest, a harvest, and a harvest. This is just miniaturized what we've been looking at that has our line on it, the 144,000, the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. And then this is alpha of modern Israel, the Millerite history. Okay, so we have harvest, 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 harvest. October 22nd begins a harvest. In that time of trouble, they are scattered. We're going to read from a couple of quotes, and there's quite a lot in these quotes, but we're just looking for one thought. If we can follow that one thought, we might go back into those quotes at a later time to glean some other things from them. But we're just looking for one thing. So we're going to go to Life Sketches 97.5. Any comments, any questions?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. So we're going to quote, but this won't be found in Ellen White's writings. It's in the Pioneer writings. I don't think I skipped one. Yeah. We're going to quote, but this won't be found in Ellen White's writings. It's in the Pioneer writings. It's NPU Gleaner, March 30th, 1910. We'll just look at those two. The first one is Ellen White. It's actually this quote itself, and it's in quotation marks. This is actually Joseph Bates when he's trying to ascertain the authenticity of Ellen White and her visions. So here's the quote from NPU Gleaner, March 30th, 1910. I therefore sought opportunities in the presence of others when her mind seemed freed from excitement out of a meeting to question and cross-question her and her friends which accompanied her, especially her elder sister, to get, if possible, at the truth. He gives a little more information and says, I believe the work is of God and is given to comfort and strengthen his scattered, torn, and peeled people since the closing up of our work for the world in October 1844. That's the part we want to look at. This was published by James White in 1847. It's that part, what Joseph Bates is recognizing, however much they don't understand the prophetic framework of what has taken place. He recognizes that there was a work that closed up from October 1844, and God's people are now what? They're now scattered, torn, and peeled. We'll focus on that word scattered. So when they're disappointed in October 22nd, 1844, God's people are scattered. And we've been looking at those lines where she lays out the scatterings and gatherings. We looked at those last week, where they were scattered and during the Dark Ages, and then gathered, and then scattered again in 1844. Gathered would be gathered in 1850, but they went into the Laodicean condition, and then in 1863 scattered again. So our other quote, this is not Ellen White. After the disappointment, light is given on the sanctuary question, the Sabbath truth, and the three angels' messages of Revelation 14. The cities of the East were given the light of present truth. So there was light in that dispensation, which is important, and we're going to come back to that. But again, that isn't the theme or the thread that we're pulling now. Light shone on the pathway of the scattered believers concerning the near advent of their Lord, and some received the message gladly. We just looked at two quotes. One's Joseph Bates, and it's written in Life Sketches. One is someone separate, and then we'll see Ellen White, and they'll all describe this time period as a time period of scattering, when they were not bringing a message to the world with any effect. So this period of time, they're scattered, and they're not bringing the message to the world with any effect. So when we look over in the Omega history, we see that there are two calls for the church. 2019, waymark for us, the cross for the disciples. It's a waymark for us. It's all, the cross for the disciples. We see it as cross for us as well. It is the close of probation for the first group called. So there's a close of probation here for the first group called. And this is October 22nd, the close of probation for a first group called. You have a first group here and a first group here, and the close of probation for each. So this 1850 here being Sunday law, at the Sunday law, who do you go to? The church or the world? Because remember, you have two calls to the church and one call to the world. So 1850 being the Sunday law, where do you go to? The Sunday law, 34 AD, you go to the world. But here you go to the Gentiles. So you've got some time missing here.
So I have a question.
Yeah,
So we know that the Sunday law is a series of progressive laws, and that's why we're each taking a topic of the events that happened in 2014 to explore those different events that occurred. But will there still be one maybe specific law? If you follow what I'm saying, like like we're watching Texas, right? And what it's doing with the vigilante laws and that other governor in Virginia, I can't think of his name, but and all he's like doing a vigilante law now. Having parents turn in the teachers at schools if they're teaching topics. What is that? Cultural? What's that called? I just lost the.
critical race theory.
Oh, yeah, that's it. And there's the other one. The other one. Phil asked, "What is that?" On Sabbath. Oh, what's the other one? Do you remember, Phil? You were asking, what is that?
No, I don't remember.
Oh, I want to say culture. Culture.
Oh, cancel culture?
Oh, cancel culture. Yeah, okay.
That's it. Thank you. I need your help. My brain just won't pull it. So that cancel culture, we were talking about the book banning too. And they're starting that. That's sweeping the states now, the Republican states, where they're pulling off gender, any books about LGBTQ. They're pulling off books like, what's the one? To Kill a Mockingbird,
Mouse.
Mark Twain book, right?
Mouse, is that how you say
And,
it? M-A-U-S?
huh?
Mouse, M-A-U-S?
What? Yeah, that's that book that's told as a children's story using mice as Jews, right? And it's a good way to teach through stories. People you can tell people about racism or sexism or whatever, but when you tell a story, people can relate to the characters in the story, and it makes them understand, right, what you're trying to explain better. Anyway, they're pulling all those books off the shelves, and I was just reading tonight, I think it was in the New York Times, and the article's titled something like, Daddy, Tell Me About Originalism, because now there's a push by the right side to fill up these empty spaces of the books that they're removing with conservative books that will teach the values they want their kids to learn about, right? And we know those are also the two streams. Originalism is what Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Scalia used to interpret the Constitution, how they read, how we read, right? And it's the living, I think it's called the living interpretation, where it's a living document, and it progressively, just like our light progressively opens up and we learn more and more and more. God's teaching us a living way to interpret. And so they have their two forms of interpretation too on the Constitution. And so that's a new book now, a new children's book. There's this author that's promoting books to teach kids originalism. And the reason I brought that up, I started that for something you said. Help my poor old brain.
Yeah, you asked a question, and I was going to ask others to answer that. You asked
The
about
Sunday law.
Mhm. I was gonna
Yes,
ask if
thank
somebody
you.
else- I was going to ask if somebody else wants to answer your question. Does anybody remember her question?
Will there be one law after these series of things are happening? We're watching this progress, and each of these things is the progress, but will there be one, sort of like the Fugitive Slave Act type of law, that we will see occur, that actually marks, is the
Anybody-
final marking point?
Anybody have an answer for that? Nobody?
Yeah, well, I don't know. But but my thought was that, yeah, I don't know for sure, but my thought was that no, there won't be that one law. I mean, how are we going to, I mean, my thought is like, how are we going to know? There's so many bad laws. How are we going to know the one?
Well,
I don't know.
how do we know what the big Sunday law looks like? How does Elder Test say that we know what the Sunday law looks like?
It has to be based on gender.
Yeah, but that's an answer, but I'm not looking for that particular answer. How do we know what the Sunday law looks like
Oh, based on 2014.
based on 2014? So what was it, 2014?
A whole
But
bunch of
that's
different
what I
events.
said. All those events. So that's I still feel like all those events are going to culminate to something that's like, I don't know how to explain it.
Well, what she has said is that to understand the Sunday law, we have to understand, look back at 2014. And she has actually said, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but she has actually said that people tend to be waiting for one event, and it's not going to be one event, one particular law.
If I may say,
But so as these things are, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Or Christina first.
So if you look at the increase of light, when the sun come out, the light goes slowly, slowly, lighter, lighter until you get to the noon when, you know, you have the maximum light. So all those events just build up, and then when you see it, you know, for those that did not look back, it's too late. But probably, you know, just those events building up to the end, you know, to what they're looking for.
So Phil, what were you gonna say?
So they would just continue to increase. Is that what you're saying, Christina? They'll just these laws
Yes,
that are
because see,
so bad.
yeah, with every law they give, they get some ground and they can do more and more. Because like with us, God could not take us, you know, to understand the end from the beginning, because we had all that father's education from Adventism. So he had to take us step by step. So that's what they are doing also, you know, step by step, they gain ground until they get the control.
Yeah, that makes that helps clear it up. Thank you.
Phil, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, the way I understand it, it's going to be a series of laws, and to me, it kind of reminds me of, you know, Donald Trump. You know, I mean, there wasn't just one thing that he did, but you know, there was, you know, during his presidency, you know, there was that thought, like, when you thought he just can't get any worse, he does.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's what the Sunday law is going to be. It's a series, and you know, of these just ridiculous laws. And in each of those laws, we have to be on the right side of the issue. I don't think there's just going to be one. It's just going to be getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
That's a good explanation too. Appreciate it. So Trump's like a poster child of what a Sunday law is, what Sunday laws are,
Yeah.
in a way.
And that's actually what Elder Tess said. She didn't say poster child, but she did say the face, what did she put an adjective in front of that. The face of the Sunday law. Okay, so prior going to the world, what would you expect to see? We've kind of lost our train of thought, not any fault of yours as a question. We needed to answer questions, but just to review here real quick. So we see the big line for the Alpha history would have ended in 1863. But what we're seeing is that there's no October 22nd, 1844 on this line. So there's a fractal. We see that fractal, and clearly that this was a closed door. It's also said to be a scattering, a time of trouble and a harvest. Okay. And it lines up here with 2019 in the cross. It's the close of probation, and this is the first group of people. So prior to going to the world, what would you expect to see? Before the gospel goes to the world, it goes to the church in how many steps? 2 steps down here, 2 calls to the church. So you have 1 step here, step 1, October 22nd. The experience of the Millerites, that harvest time here, and that scattering time after it's harvest and scattering time, October 22nd. Then we have to ascertain this date, because if you carry this line down here, you see that it would go straight on down. So we have to ascertain this date. When would there be a second call back to the church between October 22nd, 1844 and 1850? So when is there a second call? Because we've seen 2 calls to the church before the message goes to the world. We want to go to a well-familiar quote, but we're going to read it from another perspective following this thread. Line of thought. The next quote, Review and Herald, November 1, 1850, paragraph 9. A well-familiar quote for us. This is written, dated November 1st, 1850, and we are here on our line, right here. And we're reading this quote November, if I'm reading that correctly. We're reading this quote. She says September 23rd, because she's looking back. She's looking back, September 23rd. So it's written November 1, and she's going back to September and says, September 23rd, the Lord showed me that he had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people. In what time? I'm not sure if this is written in the right place. Another thing I want to verify as I read this now, because this quote she's reading is talking about 1850. So I'm going to go back and review that afterwards. But the quote she's reading is 1850, and she's referring back to September 23rd, 1850, I believe. And that's when she gets the vision for the second chart. So the Lord showed me clearly that he had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people. What time? The second time. When was the first time? When was his hand stretched to gather his people the first time? That was 1798 to 1844. Then his people were scattered here. And now he's going to stretch out. Now he's going to stretch out his hand and gather a second time. So this reform line is the first gathering. He stretched out his hand, and a hand has how many fingers? 5, or 5 waymarks, 4 dispensations. So there's the first gathering, and then what begins at 1850? The second gathering. Is that the case for the Alpha history? God stretched out his hand to gather a remnant of his people, the disciples. Then he stretched out his hand again and gathered who? The Jews at Pentecost. At 34 AD, that is the third attempt. Then he reaches out his hand a third time, and now it has come out of Babylon, my people, come out of the statue, not out of the mountain, come out of the world, not out of the church, where you go to the world. So 2 calls to the church, and then there's a third call to God's people to come out of Babylon, to come out of the statue, to come out of the world. That's the third call. But in 1850, is it the third? No, it's the second call. So he's going, the second call, he's going to call, well, we'll keep reading here. Let's see. It's the second call. September 23rd, the Lord showed me clearly that he had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people, and that efforts must be redoubled in the gathering time. In the scattering, Israel was smitten and torn. The scattering, Israel was smitten and torn. Oops, sorry. But now in the gathering, God will heal and bind up his people. When did this scattering begin? October 22nd, 1844. So we're trying to figure out this date. When did the scattering begin? October 22nd, 1844. When did it end? We know in 1850, because we just read that quote, September 23rd. She's pointing and saying that God had shown her that he's going to gather the second time, and that's just before November. The quote date was November, but she's standing back in September 23rd, saying that in 1850, then in 1850, that God is stretching his hand the second time. So we're trying to figure out this date. Anybody remember that date? It was a trick question.
1850?
1850.
It is 1850, but is that where it goes here? It's kind of a trick question. So can you gather somebody while you yourself are scattered? So you're scattered in here, and God's stretching out his hand. No, when God's people are scattered, they cannot do a work of gathering. That's why in the scattering, efforts to spread the truth had but little effect, accomplished but little or nothing. But in the gathering, when God has set his hand to gather his people, efforts to spread the truth will have their designed effect. All should be united and zealous in the work. So this model is wrong. This here is wrong. If people are scattered, as you see, she's lined it up with here. With you've got the Alpha of modern Israel, and then the Omega of modern Israel. And this line, 1798 to 1863, is this line, 1989 to the Second Advent, the line of the 144,000. You've got the line of the priests, which is what she's looking at here, is the first group called. And the first group called here, there's clearly a shut door, there's clearly a shut door. They're scattered in a time of trouble and its harvest. And the next waymark here for us was Pentecost. So trying to ascertain this date, when this is actually 1850, when they go to the world. So this model is wrong. If God's people are scattered, they're scattered from October 22nd, 1844, all the way to 1850. This is where you take an alpha history, because remember, when you line up this big line, 1798, 1840, 1850, 1861, 1863, and it lines, it's the lined up with this line of the 144,000. So you've got these two waymarks, and then you've got down here to 1850, 1861, and 1863. So we saw this as a fractal of calling out the Millerites, right? But we saw clearly that she says, we saw three different quotes that say that this is a shut door. October 22nd was a shut door. It's a scattering. It's a time of trouble, and it's a harvest.
But there wouldn't be anybody to harvest. Because they failed, right?
Well, they did fail, yeah. Well, yeah, the movement failed. I don't know that the people, the individuals, movement failed. So we saw that 1850 is here, and that's why we're trying to look at this waymark, because it would line up with Pentecost. Okay, so the model's wrong. If God's people are scattered, they're scattered from October 22nd, 1840, all the way to 1850, which is here. This is where you take an alpha history, this is the alpha history, and you compare, we compare this history with this history. But you also have to contrast it. And what we're identifying is a contrast. There are two gatherings down here in the Omega history. But for an alpha history, where's the church? Where is Israel? It's under construction in the alpha history. This is the beginning of modern Israel, so there's no point of gathering twice. You're going to gather a people, form modern Israel, and then have that new institution do a work for the world. And at the end of modern Israel, you have this Laodicean church to deal with, and that's why it needs these two efforts, two calls into that Laodicean church. You don't have that dynamic in an alpha history. So the church was being built. They didn't have the church. Now you have the church, and there's two calls to the church. So in an alpha history, there's only one call to the church and then the world. And in an Omega history, there's two calls to the church and one call to and then a call to the world. So you compare and contrast them, and that's the contrast. So God's people were scattered all the way from October 22nd to 1850. So she just extended this out instead of having that line here that would be Pentecost, that would be two calls to the church. She extended it out to 1850. So does the line of Alpha of ancient Israel have the same dynamic? The last of ancient Israel, Alpha of ancient Israel. The last couple of weeks, we have gone over this point about priests, Levites, and Nethinims. We've shown how it existed as God's people are called out of the idolatry of Rome. You have two calls to the church. We showed how it developed from Ezra 7:9 in 2014, based on the history of Babylon. How many calls do you have to come out of Babylon for the Jews? You have two, the priests and then the Levites. The priests are called out, and then Ezra looks at them and says, where are the Levites? There's no one from the tribe of Levi. So he has to send people back into Babylon, and there has to be a second Exodus. So in Babylon, there was 2 calls to the church, and it was the priests and Levites. In ancient Israel, there was 2 calls to the church, and then it went to the Gentiles. So when it comes to Egypt, how many exoduses of Israel occurred from Egypt? 1. So 2 calls for ancient Israel to remove themselves from idolatry of Rome, 2 calls for ancient Israel to leave Babylon. How many groups left Egypt? Only 1. There's only 1 Exodus. You didn't have 1 group leave Egypt, cross the Red Sea, then say there isn't enough, we left behind. They didn't go back into Egypt and call out a second group. So you have only 1 call to Israel. So the Alpha of ancient Israel, there's 1 call to the church. You've got this middle history, there's 2 calls to the church, priests and Levites. And then you've got the Omega of ancient Israel, and there's 2 calls to the church. So you have the Millerite history here. It's the Alpha of modern Israel. And you have 1 call to the church in an Alpha history, and then you go to the world. These reform lines have not been properly developed. It's been discussed before how God is opening up reform lines in a more thorough fashion, step by step. We haven't yet properly dealt with the history of the Exodus, the beginning of ancient Israel. But you can already see that if it's the same pattern, there's only 1 call at the beginning of the history of Adventism that forms Adventism, and then in 1850, they're going to make another call into the world. So there was no church, or there was Protestantism, and the Adventist church wasn't set up yet, wasn't the people. I'm talking about the people, not the building, but the people. So the call was to come out of Protestantism and then go to the world. But in a Omega history, or in our history, you see the churches in the Laodicean condition, like within Babylon, and there was 2 calls coming out of Babylon, the priests and the Levites. And in our history, there's 2 calls. I think I missed this, did I? When it comes to Egypt, how many exoduses of Israel occurred? 1. Did I read this already? How many groups left Egypt? Only 1. There's only 1 Exodus. Okay, so we saw that.
Yeah, you read. Yes, you read that.
Okay. So you have harvest for the Millerites in that gathering time from 1850 to 1861. So you have harvest, what did she say? So you have harvest from 1850 to 1861. Then you have the time of trouble, and that harvest of 1861 to 1863 of those who should have numbered the 144,000. So this would have been a harvest here. So there's a harvest here from October 22nd to 1850. There's a harvest 1850 to 1861, time of trouble, and then this harvest that would have been the 144,000. So 1 call to the church, 1 call to the world, and then it would have been 144,000. We know that where our history ends at Panium, prior to the Sunday Law, their Second Advent waymark extended all the way to 1850. So we would have had Panium here. We have Panium here where they don't have that waymark here. So we know where our history ends at Panium, the priest history, prior to the Sunday Law. Their Second Advent waymark extended all the way to 1850. So 1798, 1840, the shut door, let's see, the shut door and the scattering of October 22nd, 1844, and that scattering that extended to 1850, all the way to 1850. We know that important things happen in that time. So we do need to look at that. The middle waymark here is July 21. So if you were to open up this line, you've got to have the 5 fingers, the 5 dispensations, or the 5 waymarks, 5 waymarks and the 4 dispensations. Make sure I say that straight. So the 5 waymarks and the 4 dispensations. So we do need to look at that. The middle waymark is July 21, 1844, and what happens there. This is the Boston camp meeting. So we have Boston, Concord, and Exeter, and then the test. That's where we get those symbols from. So you have here the beginning of the midnight cry message that's going to grow and swell. Beginning of the midnight cry message, it's going to grow and swell. It's midway, midnight, the symbols associated with the Sunday law. So this is the first group called, this is the Millerites. This is this first group, and it's the Millerites. Then we can construct a second line underneath, and it takes you to 1861. Where is the call going to this group? What is the latter rain loud cry message going? What is it going? When it's the world, it's the Nethinims. It's the history of the 144,000, the latter rain that coincides with their harvest, because it's a latter rain for the 144,000, but it's the harvest for the world. Latter rain for the 144,000, but the harvest for the world. Make sure I got that right. Okay, so latter rain for the 144,000, but it's the harvest for the world, because the harvest for the 144,000 is here. So this is the latter rain for the 144,000, but it's the harvest for the world. The harvest for the world is when they are cut out of that statue, when they're cut out from the world and join God's people. They come out of Babylon. Come out of Babylon is the call of the loud cry. They come out in the Sunday law history in the time period of their harvest. If you want that explained more clearly, it was discussed quite thoroughly in Holland. So there's this second gathering that began in 1850. I think we have I think there were 62 slides, so we got a little ways to go. So there's this second gathering that began in 1850. This first gathering, the Millerites, what was their tool? What was their weapon? It was the 1843 chart in this history here. So they have the 1843 chart as their weapon in this time period. And what about the history for the world? And that's where they have the 1850 chart. That was the weapon that they take, the gospel message in this second time period of gathering, and they go to the world. So we have the harvest of the first group. God reached out his hand a second time here. So you have the first group, and God reaches out his hand the second time here to gather, to harvest the world. Then you have that time of trouble here, the close of probation, and the Civil War. And this was the latter rain for the 144,000. And this is the harvest of the 144,000, would have been. We wanted to put that structure in place so we can see when we go back into Millerite history that we can know that our framework, what our framework is. We can know what structures we're to look at. So someone asked, that would make 1861 a second coming for the world, wouldn't it? Making this the second coming for the world, wouldn't it? So whose close of probation is 1861? It's the exact same answer you had for the 144,000. Whose close of probation is Daniel 12:1? So the close of probation on which line? It's the 144,000. So it's a close of probation for the 144,000. This is a close of probation for the 144,000. If we can try and explain our fractals in the following way, we say fractals, but that's not entirely accurate. It's not a perfect fractal. What we are seeing is we can visualize it as a shadow. The line of the 144,000 is as your body. It has all the details of your body. It has the shape of your nose. It has the shading of your skin. It has your freckles, if you have them, the dimples in the cheeks, the shade of the eyes. It has all of those details. This template line is like a body. This template line is like a body. And then as we see God prepare these three groups, again, it's an imperfect parable, but it has the semblance of a shadow, these three groups. It doesn't have all of the form and it doesn't have all of the details of the body. So when we come to this Sunday law on the 144,000, you would expect to see a law in Congress that forces you to either disobey that law or violate the law of God. This goes to the question asked earlier. Did that happen in 2014? No. But 2014 is a Sunday law. It's the Sunday law for the first group called, but it's also marking progression. It's showing us the steps, the successive steps that bring you to that law. We looked at 2014 and we saw the changes in the legislative and the judicial branches. It doesn't have all the appearance of the body, but it does show the shape. So 2019 is a shut door. Did Christ cease intercession? No. But you know that there was a shut door, that there was a test that faced this movement that divided us and continues to divide us into two groups of people. We stand here at Concord, the death decree. That was May 5th, 2020, when she laid that out, the increase of knowledge, beginning with the death of George Floyd. You had the death of George Floyd, then you had the 4 deaths. Sorry, so this is a little bit later. This was September. May would be back here. This was September after you saw the death of John Lewis. I can't remember the actor's name. Somebody remember his name? And Helen Reddy and Ruth RBG. Does somebody remember the actor's name?
Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So that was marking the death decree. Is there a death decree facing us right now? No. But can we see the time of trouble? What happens at the death decree? All those opposed to the movement God has raised up come into unity on one thing and one thing alone, their opposition to this movement. So they come into unity, not on their understanding of the word of God. They come into unity of their opposition to this movement. So what do we find at Concord? Everyone who stands in opposition to the midnight cry comes into unity. They are in unity on nothing except their opposition to this movement, and that is why we face a further shaking now. Everyone who rejects the midnight cry comes into unity on that one point. So we experience the death decree in the form of a shadow. So we know that when you get down here, there's a death decree. And for this line here, you know that we don't have it on these on this study, but you have the little way marks, right? The little way marks in between. And that we saw that there was a death decree. There would be a death decree here. There's a date, I think it's the date or a time, and then the death decree. So you have the death decree here, and it's the shadow of this. The second advent, is there a literal second advent here? Literal second advent? No. But you can see it. You can see the shut door, the Sunday law, the midnight cry, the latter rain, time of trouble, conquered at death decree, externally and internally, conquered, the upper room, the second advent. You have all the shadow there. It's powerful, but it doesn't have all the contours of the body that you expect to find in the template line. So when we look at the close of probations, that is what we see: successive shut doors, shut door, shut door, shut door. But we know it's a shut door for the 144,000, but there's 144,000 in the world in its entirety is the end of intercession. So coming from a question about intercession, there is still intercession until Daniel 12:1. In closing, we'll summarize. We've reminded ourselves of the 4 reform lines that construct the end of ancient and the end of modern Israel. We've reminded ourselves that there are 3 groups called, the 144,000 coming from one of those groups. But there are 3 groups: the priests, the Levites, the Nethinims, church, and the world. We've seen that the 2 groups, the disciples, the Jews at Pentecost, and the Gentiles. So 2 calls in an alpha history priests, Levites, Nethinims, or the disciples, the Jews at Pentecost, and then the Gentiles. The Jews failed because they were so focused on the restoration of the glorious land. They're so focused on what they believe is about to occur externally that they failed to experience the necessary steps internally that would take them to 34 AD. Because they fail in the history leading up to 34 AD, there's no hope for them beyond as an institution, and for many of them individually. Adventism is going down the same road. The whole world is split into these two camps, and Adventism finds themselves standing on the side that is already directly opposed to what prophecy tells us. And we hear that too since then, that Adventism finds themselves standing on the side that is already directly opposed to what prophecy tells us. Because we heard that in Ted Wilson's sermon, calling LGBTQI plus an aberration, and that's Babylon. Aberration, did I say that right? And that's Babylon. And also telling people, if somebody comes to you telling you that there's no Sunday Sabbath issue, they're a false prophet and don't believe them. So in complete opposition with the church, with Adventism. So I'll make one final point about that. Two camps. You have social liberalism that says the great threat is nationalism. So liberalism says the threat is nationalism. You have social conservatism that says the threat is globalism, the satanic deep state, the United Nations coming into unity, working as a bloc, European Union, the World Health Organization. You have these two different sides. When we have the current shaking in this movement, what people are doing is saying, if I have freedom, if you truly give me freedom, then I am liberal, but I have the freedom to be socially conservative. So if I want to be, I can still be socially conservative because I have freedom. So if someone says I'm a woman, I'm in Kakuma refugee camp, I'm South Sudanese, and I believe liberalism, therefore I have freedom, therefore I have the freedom to be bought and sold like a slave, to have someone pay dowry for me. The way people are using the concept of freedom is to actually attack and undermine the exact freedom they're offered. They're seeing equality, freedom, therefore we have the freedom to be socially conservative, to pay dowry, to not practice equality, to focus on the type of deeply entrenched conservative Hollywood ideals that place the value of a woman on her body and her appearance. This freedom that is occurring under the current issues that have split this movement is so-called freedom to stand on the wrong side. All that we're saying is that you're failing the test. You think you're a liberal, but you're conservative. If you think freedom means that you don't have to study for the test, then you're already failing it. That freedom is designed to help us to prepare for the test, not to say I have the freedom to fail it. I have the freedom to not study for it, and somehow, because of that freedom, I'll be saved. What we're seeing now being done in the name of freedom is nothing more than social conservatism and inequality rebranded. We saw two calls for the church, one call for the world. We went back and we saw this middle history. We come out of Babylon. Two groups. The Jews came out of Babylon, priests and the Levites. 1888, we haven't touched. Coming back to our Alpha history, the Alpha of ancient is the calling out of Egypt. The Alpha of modern is the calling out of apostate Protestantism. Calling out of apostate Protestantism here. We've made a contrast between Alpha and Omega histories. In an Alpha history, there's only one call for the church. We saw that also in Egypt. They only leave Egypt as one body, as one group. Then they're going to go through their own scattering, their own wilderness experience. Then they'll go into Canaan and do a work for the world. So you have one group scattered, Then they go and do a work in Canaan. In the alpha of modern, one group scattered from October 22nd, 1844, all the way to 1850, which is the Sunday Law. October 22nd, 1844, all the way to 1850, which 1850 is the Sunday Law. And then it goes to the world. Then at 1850, they're going to go forward and do a work for the world. So we stand here. Remember, this was back in September of 2020. Quite a ways back. It just seems like yesterday. So we stand here and we have understood, we have to understand, particularly this dispensation internally, but we have to understand all this history externally. Every single one of these waymarks, omega, are external events. Every single one of these waymarks, alpha, are external events. Each waymark. And we suggest this is all about external events. You know that what 1861 is, 1850, 1798, 1840. And the only thing we need to know, the first thing we need to nail down is 1844 and that presidential election. Looking at 1844, because these are external events. We see external events. So what we need to know is 1844 and the presidential election. Also to remind us, if 1844 is a presidential election, what else is the presidential election? Go back one presidential term, 1840, is a presidential election. It's interesting, 1840 elects the 9th US president. He dies while in office. His vice president becomes president, finishes that term. So in 1844, what number US president is elected? The 11th. So you have the 9th, he dies, the vice president takes his place and finishes the term. And in 1844, you have the 11th president. You have 9/11. So we're marking 1840, which lines up with 9/11. You have 9/11, the 9th president elected dies in office. October 22nd lines up with 2019. And you have the 11th US president elected. 11th because you had a death in office of the 9th, the 10th being his vice president, and the 11th being the 1844 elected James Polk. So even there you have a 9 and 11. And it's just kind of drawn out here a little bit more. So this is a history of intense external events. From 1840 to 1863, you have how many presidential elections? You have 1840, 1844, 1848, 1852, 1856, 1860. So you have 6 presidential elections between 1840 and 1863. How many US presidents do you have in those 6 elections? If you have 6 presidential elections, you would expect that you would either have 3, because there would be 2 terms, 2 terms, 2 terms, or you'd have a maximum of 6. Actually, you have Martin Van Buren, 1, William Henry, 2, William Henry Harrison, 2, James John Tyler, 3, James K. Polk, 4, Zachary Taylor, 5, Millard Fillmore, 6, Franklin Pierce, 7, James Buchanan, 8, and Abraham Lincoln, 9. You have 9 presidents where you would have had 6. You have 9 US presidents in a history when you only have 6 US elections. You have 2 deaths in office, and one of them, the reason you get the 9th, is because of that 1840 election where you have 2 close together. So this is an intense political time. The 1844 election was the turning point in the US history. And we want to understand the external events that brought us not just to the Civil War, but to that 1850 compromise. When you find the sin being laid not just at the South, but on the North as well. Before we do any of that, we need to have correctly the structure in place, put in place. We've compared and contrasted the alpha and the omega histories. we'll review this next time so we can have these constructs clearly in our mind, and clearly in our mind why there's this contrast. And it's neat that we can already see that it fits with the history of Egypt. It fits with the history of ancient Israel, one call to the church. In Babylon, 2 calls to the church. In Rome, 2 calls to the church. Okay. Everybody follow that okay? The main point. You guys awake?
That we need to understand our history.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, we need to understand our history. One call to the church also in an alpha, and 2 calls in an omega. And we need to understand our history. What led up to that compromise? I got to do something here real quick before I forget. Okay. So, any other comments? Nobody? Maybe if Ruth, are you able to close in prayer? I know you have kids, so I'm not sure if you're available there. Maybe Christina, would you like to close in prayer? Are you guys with us? No? Susan, how about you? I'm a little concerned about whether or not anybody's there.
Okay.
Good, Susan's here. Okay, good.
I'm here.
Okay.
Loving God, thank you so much, Lord, for the patience that you've extended. I know to myself, Lord, but to all of us, Lord. Thank you for the time that Elaine spent this evening explaining and answering questions and helping us review. Continue to work with each one of us, Lord, to help us seal this information into our minds, and so that we'll be able to explain this back. Lord, we're not exactly sure how this is going to go, how you're going to instruct us to teach the Levites, Lord, but we trust your plan for us, and we thank you for taking care of each and every one of us like you have. And I'd like to pray for Penny and Bob. They're supposed to be getting hit really hard with an ice storm tonight, Lord, and they might be completely out of power. I know a lot of people are getting hit very hard with this storm, Lord. Please protect them. Penny takes care of their 2 mothers, elderly. Please keep them safe and warm, and each and every one here, Lord, and may we have a restful evening. Thank you, Lord. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.